Fiona, this is your second appearance on the podcast. Thank you so much. And why don't you start off by telling everyone a little bit more about who you are and what you do?
Well, thank you for having me back. Pleased to be on the podcast again. As you mentioned, I'm Fiona Hale. I'm Managing Director of CoolCare. We're care home administration software providers. So we cover everything that a care home needs to help it run more easily, more efficiently, and importantly, more profitably. So that's taking into account all the areas of staffing, so your time and attendance, your rostering, recruitment, helping you to keep an eye on those candidates that Spring Up PR are helping you bring in. And then also on the resident side, occupancy and inquiry management, which we talk about today, as well as your resident billing. So making sure that you're charging your residents accurately.
That's great. That's great. For all you listeners, just to let you know, Fiona and I were having a chat, obviously, before we press record. And I was telling Fiona of the clients that we have. And Fiona seems to have all of them, plus like thousands more. So Fiona and CoolCare really know what they're doing. So make sure you tune in and take notes, as I say. Great. So tell me more, Fiona, about discerning customers or prospective families. What do we mean by that now, kind of after the miseries of COVID?
Yeah, I think speaking to our customers and seeing what's happening on the ground, that seems to be the big difference. I think there are still inquiries out there, but whereas before they perhaps go and see two or three of their local care homes, just pop in for a visit, they're now wanting to go and view a lot more. So, rather than being on a list of one of three, care homes to find themselves on the list of one of 10. And prior to going in and walking through the door, they've done a lot more research. They've looked at the website, they've read articles, they're really using online skills now to interrogate whether this might be the right care home. And so I think all of those things that perhaps were previously, a step above, having a good website, good PR presence, SEO, AdWords. I think that's now a prerequisite to even get yourself on the list. And then once they're actually going in, they're obviously looking at a broader spectrum. They've got a bigger shopping list that they need to go through. So making sure that you have a really good experience once you've got that inquiry is super important, because you're in a more competitive marketplace.
Yeah, and I tell the providers we talk to is that the inquiry is after they've done, as you say, in this period of discerning of families, after they've done the website, the online checks, gone to carehomes.co.uk, gone to CQC. Often, not always, but often that is the case. Often, as you probably know, like if you have an amazing website or they read something really amazing about you, bang, that will be enough for them to get in touch. But often it's there's been work done already to get to that point. In terms of the inquiry when it comes in, so we imagine we've got this great website, we've got some great online presence, they are well known, an inquiry comes in, it may be on the back of that, it may not be, maybe just because they're making inquiries to a number of homes, as you mentioned. Tell us what you think should happen from there onwards.
So there's lots I could talk about. So I'm going to go for the broadest principle. And I think the broad principle is that you should demonstrate through that inquiry journey in lots of different ways how that resident will be treated when they move into the home. That level of care has to start in that pre-sales process. And I think that to me is fundamental, because you're selling a care service. So if you don't care about the inquiry and you don't clearly demonstrate that in how you handle it at each step, then your chances of conversion are greatly reduced, because that is what you want to see. And I think the very first step in that is making sure you have got a record of that inquiry. And I know that sounds really basic, obvious, but it's not. We still hear that actually that's part of the reason people take a digital system, because at head office level, they're doing lots of chasing around to find inquiry information that's handled on pieces of paper. They don't have a central record, and it's not always that clear that the care home does. If you don't have a record, how are you looking after it effectively? And I heard an anecdote recently, and I'm not going to name names, but the head office brought in a digital system. They were doing lots of marketing, and so they could see from the other homes that they were getting inquiries in off this marketing, but in one of the homes it wasn't doing as well, because they could see they weren't getting the inquiries, they weren't going on the system. And so whereas before perhaps they'd have increased their spending, tried to get more residents in the home because they couldn't see how many inquiries they had, said they did a mystery shop. And the call was good, nothing wrong with the initial call, but the inquiry never went onto the system. And they later kind of waited to hear back. They didn't hear anything else back. They didn't turn up to the show round that they had so-called booked. They didn't get a follow-up from it. Nothing kind of happened with it. And when they spoke to the team in the care home to find out, well, why didn't this inquiry go on the system? So, well, we didn't want to get scrutiny over it, so we didn't put it on. And actually, that scrutiny would have been the one thing that would have helped here, and that's what was needed. They needed to know that they got the inquiry, that there was a show round booked, and that the prospective resident didn't turn up, so they could then do the follow-up call to say, you didn't show up on Saturday. We were looking forward to seeing you. We hope everything's okay. Could we book you back in for Monday? Whatever it might be. And so having the digital system in itself enabled the care home to see that to see that the inquiries weren't going on. So tick number one. But then it's all the things that having that record enables thereafter is so important.
Yeah, interestingly, you use the word scrutiny as well, because it shouldn't be like that. It should be a matter of handling inquiries is a skill, an art, and an asset all in its own right. And the possibilities that one has ever evolving in terms of learning from inquiry management, learning from recorded calls. If you're having a call coming in via telephone, recording that call, if that's okay. But if you can, have a culture where that's okay, because we all want to learn as a team, as an organization, of how to do our best. Then I'm curious to use the word scrutiny, whereas in fact, I can see if it feels that something's to be scrutinized, then your team's not going to be on board with it necessarily. But if you can use the language and have the culture to encourage your team to be on board and see for them how it helps them and everyone else to do a better job. And I know that 9 times out of 10 maybe they're involved in care and not inquiry management as such. But at the end of the day, we all want great operators, want to do a great service. And usually the best providers of care, tell me what you think, are actually those who actually handle some of those calls better than others.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's what this customer learned in this instance was actually it showed them it wasn't just the inquiry management at the home level that needed some assistance, but actually it's how they communicated internally, because they were trying to do that. They're using the data to understand, right, what are the difference between the homes, where is the best practice, where can we improve, who needs a bit of training, a bit of support. And that had been translated back to, it's scrutiny, I'm being criticized because I'm not doing X, Y, and Z. And so, it's really important that you got that open culture. And that I think there is also, we found, going prior to the pandemic, for those in the home that often end up dealing with inquiries, not in every organization, it's different organizations have different structures, but there's often a feeling of, I have to do something different. This is something that is alien to me as a home manager. I'm not a salesperson. I don't want to do a sales pitch. And I think that's where, when you put really good processes in, and when we're talking about that customer experience, if you can change that mindset to be more, actually, care about the inquirer like you'd care about your residents. Do these tasks like you would do when they become a resident. There are tasks that you have to do to make sure that they're well cared for and that you're you kind of on top of their needs. See the inquiry in that same way and have a process that is structured to support that. And that simplifies it, and it also gives a bit more confidence to those at the front line who are actually out speaking to inquirers day to day.
Yeah, and on that note, actually, I was speaking to again, head of a care provider not so long ago, and I hope she doesn't mind me revealing this, but I won't say her name. But she tried to rechange how this was thought about, handling inquiries and sales. She said this is actually about being well led, well led CQC. I think it was well led. It might have been another attribute, but not thinking it as sales, but redefining it as something to do with you as an operator, and it can be measured or understood within the parameters of CQC.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Because as soon as you start seeing it within CQC, it's no longer sales. And I thought that was an interesting way to start to try and re-envisage what inquiry management and sales might be all about.
It's interesting because I've not thought about it particularly in that way. When we look at the care journey and we kind of talk about that as the customer experience, but yeah, if you start using CQC language, you could talk about being responsive as well. So to my point about having the good record, well, what's the time from you getting that initial call to booking in the show round? Do you know how long after that do you do a follow-up call and make sure that they've had all their questions answered and that you're ready to book in an assessment? And I think that responsiveness point is really important. And when you start using something like a digital system, it really opens up the possibilities for that, because it stops being reliant on one person as well. Again, back to your point on being well led, in that you've got your prospective resident, your inquirer's record. You can see all of that information. You have different people working on it. So if, Adam, you've booked in the show round but you're not able to do it, you can pass all of that information on to whoever else then picks it up and make sure that it still happens in line with the need of that inquirer, rather than being driven by a single point of contact within an organization. I think that passing of information is hugely important. And like you say, that is where your quality providers do tend. I don't think it's always the case, but more often than not, your quality providers have already recognized this and realized that we do a great job over here when we've got them in the home. Right, all we need to do now is reflect that in our inquiry process and make sure that we're aware of all our inquirers, so we don't have anybody that's expecting a response from us and doesn't hear back from us and doesn't get that good customer experience. And then following through that journey, does everything happen in a timely fashion? Are things being left to the point where it's no longer relevant to that inquirer? By the time you've got an answer, they've had to choose somewhere else. And I think a final point on that we maybe pick up in a couple of minutes is actually on waiting list management. Because sometimes you're generating these inquiries, but that's to pre-fill a potential future empty bed. You may not have empty beds at the moment, and again, that's where at the minute our customers, at least that the higher quality customers, they're all sitting with long waiting lists. I know the ONS said that they're predicting that 1 in 5 beds at the moment are unfilled, but I don't think that is across the board. I think there are some operators that are sitting at the moment with very high occupancy. Again, this goes back to our original point around the discerning customer, that they're picking those. Some of them are willing to wait, but what's then important is to make sure when you get that available bed, this inquirer that's been sitting on the waiting list is able to move in seamlessly, because it just makes that whole process better for the resident and more efficient for the operator, because you don't have to go and get another inquiry in to fill that bed. You've got one pre-warmed up there and just waiting.
And all this is so important when you consider, as you mentioned, that with this discerning family member, likely to be a family member, could be local authority as well. No reason why it isn't. That they are maybe almost certainly looking at a number of homes, and if you don't get this experience right from the very beginning, you're putting yourself lower down the pecking order potentially.
Yeah, I heard a story from a chief exec I was speaking to recently, one of our customers. I won't name names because he didn't say that I could share the story, but I think it's a beautiful reminder of how important this process is. So he was visiting one of the care homes in his group. When he walked in, there was somebody in reception crying, and the staff were speaking to them. So he kind of left it and carried on with what he was doing. And then at the end of the visit, he came back and he said, what was happening in reception when I first walked in? Why was that lady crying? Thinking it was, potentially resident or next of kin, something like that. So no, it's an inquirer. She's just done a show round of the home, and she'd been looking for a care home for a mother for ages and hadn't found anything suitable. And this is the first place that she's walked into that she could actually see her mother living in, and was just so relieved to have found the right place.
Yeah, wow.
And that's the kind of reaction that you're looking for.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, hopefully we don't want to bring people to tears, but they were tears of joy. That is how meaningful this process is.
Yeah. And what about some tips, Fiona, on literally answering the phone, handling an email response or an email inquiry, chat, live chat, or chat on from the website, or again a phone call from a Google ad or inquiry from a Google ad, wherever however it might come. Do you have some tips on how to use this word, make it a good experience for this prospective family member?
I think the first thing is always responsiveness. How frustrating is it when you inquire about something and you don't hear back, or it takes ages for the phone to answer? I think having quick response times is hugely important. And then it's that first address you have, it's the warmth of it. Whether that's an email and you've maybe got some pre-agreed text that just kind of warms it up, or on the phone, that standard response. It's hugely important. And the words matter, but I think the tone is certainly on the phone is the most important thing. And I was always taught, smile when you speak, because you can hear that down the phone, and it does make a difference. It sounds daft, but it changes the tone, and I think that warmth is hugely important. On the telephone, one of the things that big piece of advice I'd give is just remember that a lot of those people that will be answering the phone now are probably not as used to taking phone calls as we all once were. It's a rarer medium for us to use. More often than not, we are on text, we're on email. Gone are the days where you pick up the house phone and you repeat your number back and say who's speaking. So, do train your staff in that. It might be something that you remember and that you think, well, everyone knows how to answer a phone call, but actually no, that is not a skill that certainly the younger generations don't have. But even
Very true.
Getting into slightly older generations, it's not often done, or it's out of practice. And on email and on live chat, make life easy for yourself. Have some ready templates with some pre-chosen words. I mean, on live chat, depending on what feature you're using, you can often have some quick fire responses. You can just do your / and then the right word, and you can get that back, so you can get FAQs across quickly.
Yes. And in terms of the follow-up, and again, I was speaking with a care provider recently, and they said they were on the follow-up, they were worried about hassling people. And I said, well, no, just you're there to help them, and in any way you can help, So if I'm following up someone who talked about respite, the possibility of respite, and they said, oh, contact us when you're ready. I said, no, well, fine, but contact them later. Say, how are you getting on? How's your relative? Can we
Yeah.
help in any way? Who's going to be top of the line when you come in with that approach?
Yeah, exactly. Tell them how lovely it was to meet them, because these are people that are potentially going to be living in your home. This is going to be their home. They want to feel welcomed. And this is, again, another really important part of it. So get the record and then follow through that process. What are the standard steps?
Yeah.
And there should always be a follow-up, even if it's a courtesy, thank you for coming to see us. I mean, that if someone came round to your house and you've had a nice time, you often drop them a text to say, thanks for coming round.
Exactly.
Not putting pressure on. And I think another important part of that, and again, where having an inquiry management system helps with this, is let's say you've got an event in the home coming up. I don't know, you're having a party. Why not invite your prospective inquirers, or if your home is full, invite your waiting list, because they might be coming to live there soon, and chances are they're living locally. They want a bit of engagement with the home. It's a good way of keeping them alive and actually giving them a little window into what life in your home might look like.
Yeah, yeah. And there's so many little things you can do that take zero time, but can create really strong, a strong impact. So talking about the after the call, after the inquiry, yeah. So it's, if you've got a mobile phone number, after you've spoken to them, even if let's text saying it was a pleasure to speak with you today. We're here to help you at any time.
Yeah.
Best wishes. Send a photo of the home and put. You know what? The small things are power of an emoticon. If I send a text message or email with a smiling face, yeah, that gives a message, that tone and sense that I'm happy when I'm speaking, emailing with you. I'm not just sending you words. I'm actually sending you a message with a sentiment. And, again, we're getting into the real details here. But again, how many operators, speaking one home today, 6 competitors, one home. Yeah. Imagine the difference if they get inquiries, they start to add these little elements in, because I bet their competitors are doing that. Again, the little touches that can create a sense of, oh, that's nice.
And I can imagine that someone working in a care home might be listening to this and thinking, oh, this is adding more and more work on. This is,
Yeah.
How am I going to cope with this? But I've already got all these inquiries and I've got a massive list, and this is adding more.
Yeah.
Actually, do you know what now? If you're using a system like CoolCare, for example,
Yeah.
I mean, you can do it on paper, but I do think it makes
Yeah.
it a little bit harder. You can start actually working a bit smarter. You can make these things a bit easier. But the really important thing is you can start actually making a decision about whether or not this inquiry is going to go anywhere. Is this an inquiry that actually, no, you're not going to keep hassling them because they've given you all the signs along the way that they're not interested, or they'll come back to you if they are. And at this stage, they're not looking for another 2 years. You maybe put them on your mailing list, but that's not an active inquiry that you need to have in your mind right now. So you can close that inquiry off.
Yeah, that's a great point.
And this is, with the waiting list, is your waiting list really active? Have they got their assessments done? Are they ready to move in? Because I think often what happens when you're not working in a really structured way with your inquiries, you end up with this massive list of people. And that's all it is. It's not, they're not well-nurtured inquirers that you've brought to the end of an important journey. That you then know, right, they've made the decision that this is the home for them, and I've given them everything along the way to assist with that. Or do you know what, I've done everything along the way and they've made the decision not, so I'm going to close it off. The more time you spend up front, the shorter that journey becomes, the quicker you see the outcome of it, the less time you spend overall, and the quicker you can close it off if it's not right. Now, what I'm not saying there is you pick up the phone and say, I'm not interested, and you shut it right down. You still need to go through the right steps and create the right experience. But once you've done that, you can more quickly and with more certainty go, right, no, this opportunity is not going anywhere. This inquiry is not going anywhere. And importantly, to the point earlier about scrutiny and trust, if you've got really good records of all of this and you can see it with a lovely customer journey on your inquiry management system, head office can look at that and go, yeah, they're managing their inquiries really well. So we don't need to ask any questions. We don't need to call up because we can see it all, and we can see the reasons why people are saying no, or why we're closing that down.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great point. Yeah, because just, a system, a process, enables you to do exactly that, and enables everyone to know. So there's not the wonder, the puzzlement, because that's more, drives, more crazy, in the sense it drives you a little bit more crazy than actual knowing. If you're kind of, you don't know, or you're wondering, or you've not got a system, then that's like, it's the comfort of a process means that so therefore there's, you can work on, refining the process, improving it, rather than like the angst of not even having a process, so no one knows, and it's all kind
Exactly.
of like,
And you reduce that feeling of, am I hassling someone? No, because you've already predefined how many contacts you think is a reasonable amount. And equally, again, if you're using a system, what you can then do, so I can only talk about CoolCare, but in CoolCare, let's say, for example, I call up the inquirer and they say, oh, look, at the moment, I'm not feeling very well, and I'm not in a position to kind of discuss this. Can you call me back in a couple of weeks? Now, your process might say, well, normally you call them back in a week. But what you can do is you can pop a note on that explains, right, I'm not going to call back for another 2 weeks because the inquirer said they're not feeling very well. So I want to respect that. And I'm going to put the date forward on my date picker for another 2 weeks. So I do make sure at that point I pick it back up, but I've respected the wishes and I've made a note of it. And again, anyone giving scrutiny to it can go, yeah, this doesn't fall in our normal process, but I can see they're going to follow it up, and they're going to follow it up at the right point, which is being person-centered to that individual. And again, the type of care you give in the care home, you won't just ignore them completely forever because they said, don't speak to me for 2 weeks, but equally, you wouldn't want to go and do something they've expressly asked you not to do in the interim.
Yeah, that's great. And just for those, people who are listening are kind of, well, I don't know, the journey they are, where they are on this journey of inquiry management and the digitalization of it. Obviously, Fiona and CoolCare, you speak to them if you want to learn about the digital side, which is 100% where you should be going. But I'm thinking of those even just like, who are just even not quite ready to do that. My message would be, let me know what you think. Just get something up and running. You can improve it and tweak it and move it on, but just take that first step. Because once you've done that first step, then you can always move to the next step. And, just make it part of your process. Because again, I just come back, like we have during this podcast, anecdotes. So care operator, they have 3 homes. They had an inquiry from abroad. Over 2 years, they were in conversation with them. They didn't, just proactively as well, not just reliant on them calling this prospective family member. And like 2 years later, they became a resident. And they were, because they just handled that experience delightfully. That's probably one of the main reasons why they secured. And of course, the average stay for that particular home was 2 years. So again, like when you just talking numbers, that's maybe like 80,000, 100,000. Plus, great testimonials. So these are when you think of a, to use a crude commercial term, when you think of the sale, it is like, it can be at least between a 50 and 150,000 pounds sale, depending how long that resident on average will stay. So when you think of it like that, and I understand many care operators for whatever reason might not think of it like that, but that's a way to think of the value.
So I was saying, what you might be a care home that's sitting there with full occupancy potentially, but that doesn't mean that you don't need to focus or give your attention to inquiry generation or inquiry management. actually that's a really good time to start thinking about it and thinking what are the steps I need to make, looking at your current occupancy mix and thinking, right, this is a really tight market now. I've got to be looking at my margin. Am I in a good position when a bed does become available to fill it with the right type of resident for me and my operation right now? So I think that's hugely important.
That's great. Fiona, what a great episode. Now, one final question. Is there anything you'd like to talk about that we've not actually already covered?
I could talk about inquiry and occupancy management all day. So I think we've covered the main bits for this one. But if anyone ever wants to come and chat to me about it, I'm always happy to have a chat about.
That's great. That's great. Well, that leads us on to my final question. So, if anyone wants to, get in touch with you or learn more about CoolCare, what must they do?
So drop us an email on info@coolcare4.co.uk. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm usually fairly responsive. If you drop me a message, give our phone lines a call, go and take a look at our website, which is coolcare4.co.uk. Lots of ways to find us.
Perfect. Fiona, thank you so much.
No problem. Thank you so much for having me, Adam.